The rescue shuttle was cold and smelled like metal. Park sat wrapped in a thin emergency blanket, watching stars pass through the small window. Her transport ship was gone. The engine had failed without warning, and the explosion had killed everyone except her. She had been in the medical bay at the time, checking supplies. The reinforced walls had saved her life. Now she was heading to a station. They were not known for their kindness to outsiders. They were warriors, hunters, and they kept to themselves. But they were the closest civilization when her ship broke apart, and they had answered the distress call. Station 4 appeared in the window like a massive metal flower. It was built for war, not beauty. Sharp edges and weapon ports covered every surface. Took a deep breath and reminded herself to be grateful. She was alive. That was enough. The shuttle landed with a hard thump. When the doors opened, stepped out into a wide metal hallway. The air was warm and dry. It smelled strange, like burned wood and something alive. 3 stood waiting for her. They were tall, over 7 feet each. Their bodies were covered in dark scales that looked like armor made of stone. Each one had 4 arms and eyes that glowed soft yellow in the dim light. They looked at her the way someone might look at a small insect that had landed on their table. The largest one stepped forward. His voice was deep and rough. "I am Commander, you are the human survivor." Nodded, "Yes, my name is Park, thank you for saving me." Made a sound that might have been a laugh or might have been annoyance. "We answered the call, that is all. You will stay here until a human ship comes for you. 40 standard days, maybe more." 40 days kept her face calm. "I understand, I will try not to cause any trouble." "See that you do not," turned and walked away. His heavy footsteps echoed through the hallway. One of the others stayed behind. She was smaller than, with lighter scales that had a slight blue color. Her eyes were curious rather than cold. She said. "I am a scientist here. The commander has asked me to watch you during your stay." "Watch me." "To make sure you do not go where you should not go, and to make sure you do not die from doing something foolish." His mouth moved in what might have been a smile. "Humans are fragile. This station was not built for fragile things." Followed through the station. The hallways were wide enough for to walk side by side, which meant felt very small. Everything was made of dark metal. There were no windows, no plants, no colors except gray and black. Her quarters were a small room with a hard bed and a simple bathroom. It was clean but empty. Showed her how to use the food dispenser and the communication panel. "If you need help, call me through this," said. "Do not wander the station alone. Some areas are dangerous, some areas are restricted, some areas are both." Sat on the hard bed after left. The room was quiet except for the hum of machines far away. She thought about her life back on Earth. She had been a pediatric nurse for 12 years. She had held crying bobbies and comforted scared children. She had cleaned wounds and told stories and sung songs at bedsides. Now she was alone on a station full of warriors who saw her as a burden. The next few days passed slowly. Ate strange food that tasted like nothing. She read old files on her personal tablet. She exercised in her small room. She tried to learn some words from the translation program. On the 4th day, she found in the hallway and asked the question that had been bothering her. "Is there anything I can do to help while I am here? I do not like sitting and waiting. I want to be useful." Looked surprised. "Useful, you are a guest. Guests do not work." On Earth, guests often help with small tasks. It is polite, and it makes the time pass faster. Thought about this. Most work here requires strength or security clearance. What skills do you have? "I was a nurse, a healer for children." Something changed in his face. Her scales seemed to pull against her skull. "Children." "Yes, I worked with bobbies and young ones for many years. I am good with them. I can calm them when they are scared. I can help them feel safe." Was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "They do not have children the way humans do. We have cubs and cubs are not. They are not like human young. What do you mean? Cubs are born wild, they are aggressive, violent. For the first 3 cycles of their lives, they operate on pure instinct. They bite, they scratch, they attack anything that moves. His voice was flat, like she was reading from a report. Everyone who works with cubs must wear full armor. Injuries are common, deaths happen. Stared at her, deaths from bobbies. From cubs, they are not bobbies, they are. They are something else until they mature, shook her head. Your skills would not help here, trust me. This is not something humans can understand. That night could not sleep. Her bed was too hard. The room was too quiet. She lay in the darkness and thought about what it said. Cubs that attacked, cubs that killed. It did not make sense to her. All young creatures needed care. All young creatures needed warmth. That was how life worked. Then she heard it. A sound came through the walls. It was faint, but her trained ears caught it immediately. It was a cry. Not a human cry, but something similar. Something scared and alone and calling out for comfort. Sat up in bed. The sound came again. It was coming from somewhere below her, deep in the station. She should stay in her room. Had told her not to wander, but the sound pulled at something inside her chest. It was the same pull she felt when a child cried in the hospital. The same pull that had made her become a nurse in the first place. She put on her soft sleep clothes and simple shoes. She opened her door and stepped into the dark hallway. The station was quiet at night. Most were sleeping or working in other sections. Followed the sound through empty corridors and down 2 levels. The cries grew louder as she walked. Finally, she reached a massive door. It was reinforced with thick metal bars. Warning symbols covered its surface. Her translation device processed the text and displayed the words on her screen. Cub Containment Wing. Armor required. Injury waiver mandatory. Behind the door, something was crying. Not growling, not attacking. Crying. The way a frightened child cries when they are alone in the dark. Looked at the door. She looked at her thin sleep clothes. She had no armor. She had no weapons. She had nothing except 34 years of caring for scared little ones. She pressed her hand against the door panel. It opened. The room beyond the door was dark and cold. Stood at the entrance and let her eyes adjust. The air smelled wrong. It smelled like fear and metal and something sour. Emergency lights glowed red along the floor, showing her the path forward. The ceiling was high, and the walls were lined with heavy panels. Everything was built to contain something dangerous. She walked forward slowly. Her soft shoes made almost no sound on the metal floor. The crying had stopped when the door opened, but she could hear breathing now. Many small lungs taking quick, scared breaths. The hallway opened into a larger chamber, stopped and looked around. Along each wall were enclosures. They were like cages but larger. Each one had thick metal bars and reinforced walls. The floors inside were bare metal. There were no blankets, no soft things, nothing but cold, hard surfaces. And inside each cage was a cub. Counted 6 of them. They were small, about the size of large dogs. Their scales were softer than adult scales, not yet hardened into armor. They had 4 arms like the adults, but their arms were thin and clumsy. Their eyes glowed in the dark, watching her with a mix of fear and confusion. One cub was pressed into the corner of its cage, shaking. Another was scratching at the walls with small claws, leaving marks in the metal. A third was packing back and forth, making low sounds in its throat. Felt her heart break. This was not a nursery. This was a prison. These were not monsters. These were bobbies. Scared, lonely bobbies locked in cold cages with nothing to comfort them. She walked to the cage where the shaking cub was hiding. She moved slowly, the way she had learned to move around frightened children. No sudden movements, no loud sounds, just calm, steady steps. The cub watched her approach. Its eyes were wide. Its small body pressed harder against the corner. Stopped at the bars. She lowered herself to the ground so she was at the cub's level. Then she spoke. "Hello, little one." Her voice was soft, gentle, the same voice she had used 1,000 times before with crying children on Earth. The cub froze. It stared at her with something like shock. Understood. No one had ever spoken to it like this. No one had ever been soft with it. "I know you are scared," she continued. "I know this place is cold and hard, but you are not alone now. I am here." The cub made a small sound. Not a growl, not a threat, just a tiny noise of confusion. Looked at the cage door. There was a simple latch on the outside. No lock. Why would there be? No one ever entered these cages without armor. No one ever wanted to. She reached up and opened the latch. The door swung open with a soft click. The cub tensed. Its small claws scraped against the metal floor. Every instinct should have told to run. This creature was designed by nature to attack. Its claws could cut through flesh. Its teeth could crush bone. But saw only a baby, a scared baby who had never known kindness. She crawled into the cage. The space was small and she had to bend her body to fit. She sat down against the wall, close to the cub but not touching it. Then she waited. Time passed, did not move. She kept her breathing slow and steady. She hummed a quiet song, an old lullaby from her childhood. The melody filled the cold space with something warm. The cub watched her, its shaking slowed. Its breathing became less frantic. It tilted its head, listening to the strange sounds coming from her throat. Then very slowly, it moved toward her. One small step, then another. Its claws clicked on the metal floor. It stopped just out of reach and sniffed the air. Smelled like nothing it had ever encountered before. She smelled like warmth and calm and something the cub had no word for. Trust, she smelled like trust. The cub took one more step and touched its nose to her knee, held perfectly still. The touch lasted only a second. Then the cub pulled back and looked at her face. Smiled, "See, I will not hurt you." Something broke inside the cub. Some wall it had built to protect itself from the cold and the loneliness. It made a small crying sound and pushed its whole body against her. Wrapped her arms around it. The cub was warm despite the cold room. Its scales were smooth under her fingers, not rough like the adults. She could feel its heart beating fast against her chest. "There you go," she whispered. "There you go, you are safe now." The cub buried its face against her stomach. Its 4 small arms wrapped around her waist. And then, for the first time in its short life, it relaxed. Held it close and kept humming. She did not notice the other cubs watching through their bars. She did not notice them pressing closer to the edges of their cages, reaching toward her with their small hands. She did not notice the hours passing. She only noticed when the cub in her arms started making a new sound, a deep, rhythmic vibration that came from its chest. It took her a moment to understand. The cub was purring. Smiled and leaned her head back against the cold wall. Her eyes grew heavy. The cub was warm in her arms. The purring was like a heartbeat, steady and calm. She fell asleep. Morning came with the sound of heavy footsteps and the hiss of the main door opening. Light flooded the chamber. Walked in wearing her full armor, carrying a bucket of food for the morning feeding. She stopped 3 steps into the room. Her bucket hit the floor with a crash. Was sitting in an open cage, wearing only her thin sleep clothes. The most aggressive cub of batch 41 was curled in her lap, sleeping peacefully. 2 other cubs had somehow opened their own cages from the inside and were lying at her feet, their small bodies pressed against her legs. Could not move. She could not speak. She could only stare at the impossible scene in front of her. Opened her eyes at the sound of the bucket. She looked up at and smiled sleepily. "Good morning," she said. "I think they were just lonely." The cub in her lap stirred and made a soft sound. It looked at with calm eyes, then snuggled closer to and went back to sleep. Finally found her voice. It came out as a whisper. How is this possible? Before could answer, his communication device started screaming. Alarms rang through the station. Heavy footsteps thundered in the hallway. Commander was coming, and was about to change everything they believed about their children. Commander burst through the door with 6 armed guards behind him. His armor was full battle gear. His 4 hands held weapons ready to fire. He expected to find blood. He expected to find a dead human torn apart by wild cubs. He found sitting cross-legged on the floor, gently stroking the head of a sleeping cub. Stopped so suddenly that one guard walked into his back. The commander did not notice. His yellow eyes were fixed on the human woman and the 3 cubs surrounding her. "What is this?" His voice was barely a whisper. Looked up at him with calm eyes. "Good morning, Commander. I apologize for entering a restricted area. I heard crying and could not ignore it." Crying, repeated the word like it was foreign to him. "Yes, the cubs were distressed, scared, so I came to comfort them." Took a slow step forward. The cub in his lap opened its eyes and looked at him. It did not hiss. It did not attack. It simply looked at the massive commander and then closed its eyes again, content in the human's warmth. "This is not possible," his voice cracked. "These cubs are from batch 41. They are the most violent group we have had in 20 cycles. 3 handlers have been injured. 1 nearly died. And you," he gestured at her thin clothes, "you wear no armor, you have no protection, you should be dead." Smiled softly. "They are not violent, they are frightened. There is a big difference." One of the guards made a sound of disbelief. Stepped forward, her armored hands shaking. "Commander, I have studied these cubs for months. They show aggression the moment anyone enters their cages. They attack on sight. This goes against everything we know about cub development." "I know what I see." Stared at the peaceful scene. The cub called number 4, the one who had bitten through a handler's armor last week, was now resting its head on the human's knee like a tame pet. The commander turned to one of his guards. "Get Doctor, the human scientist. Bring him here now." 20 minutes later, Doctor arrived. He was the only other human on Station 4, a who had been studying biology for 3 years. He was a thin man with gray hair and kind eyes behind simple glasses. He walked into the cub chamber and stopped. He looked at the cubs. Then he started laughing. "Of course," he said, "of course this would happen." Turned to him, "Explain." Knelt down a safe distance from and the cubs. He studied them with the careful eyes of a scientist. "Commander, humans are different from most species in the galaxy. We are not stronger. We are not faster. We are not more intelligent. But we have something that seems to be very rare." "What?" "Nurturing instinct," gestured at. "Humans are evolved to care for helpless young. Our bodies are born completely dependent. They cannot walk, cannot feed themselves, cannot survive alone. So humans developed powerful instincts to protect and comfort them. These instincts do not just apply to human bodies. They apply to all bodies. Any young creature that shows signs of distress triggers our need to help." Stepped forward. "But cubs are not helpless. They are born able to fight." "Yes, but are they born wanting to fight?" Looked at the sleeping cubs. "Or are they born afraid in a world where everyone treats them like threats? A world where no one speaks softly to them, holds them, or shows them warmth?" The chamber was silent. His massive form seemed to shrink slightly. "You are saying we made them violent," he said quietly. "I am saying their violence may be a response to their environment, treated them like children." She spoke softly. She moved calmly. She offered warmth instead of weapons, and look at the result. Had been quiet during this conversation, continuing to pet the cubs around her. Now she spoke. "I would like to stay with them for the rest of my time on the station." Shook his head immediately. "Impossible. The risk is too great. We cannot be responsible for your death." "I will sign any document you need. The risk is mine to take." "The answer is no." Turned and walked toward the door. Return to your quarters. Make sure she does not enter this area again. Gently lifted the sleeping cub from her lap and set it on the ground. It whimpered at the loss of warmth and reached for her with small hands. She touched its face softly. "I will come back," she whispered. "I promise." She followed out of the chamber. The cubs watched her go with wide eyes. As soon as the door closed behind her, they began to cry. That night the cubs refused to eat. The handlers brought food in full armor and the cubs attacked the moment anyone entered. But they did not eat the food. They paced their cages and made sounds that they had never heard before. Long, sad sounds, calling sounds. They were calling for her. The noise lasted all night. It echoed through the station. No one could sleep. On the second night, Commander came to his quarters. His armor was gone. He wore simple clothes. He looked tired. "The cubs are dying," he said. "They will not eat. They will not sleep. They only cry." He paused. "What did you do to them?" Stood in her doorway, small and soft compared to his massive frame. "I loved them. That is all." "Loved them," spoke the word like he was tasting something strange. "Do not love their cubs. We contain them until they are old enough to be trained." "Maybe that is the problem." Was quiet for a long time. His yellow eyes studied her face. Then he stepped aside. "Come, they need you." Walked beside him through the quiet station. When they reached the cub chamber, she could hear the crying through the thick metal door. Her heart ached at the sound. She opened the door and stepped inside. 6 pairs of eyes turned toward her. The crying stopped. For one moment, everything was silent. Then the cubs rushed toward her. They pressed against the bars of their cages, reaching for her with small hands. The sounds they made now were different. Happy sounds, welcome sounds. Went to each cage and opened the doors. One by one, the cubs tumbled out and surrounded her. They climbed on her lap, pressed against her sides, wrapped their arms around her legs. She sat in the middle of the floor, covered in small bodies, and laughed. "I am here," she said. "I am here now." Watched from the doorway. Stood beside him, her eyes wet with tears she did not understand. Appeared behind them. He watched the scene with a smile on his face. "What are we seeing?" whispered. Thought about his answer for a moment. "On Earth, we would call this love. Apparently, it is more universal than any of us believed." The news spread faster than light. Within 2 weeks, the story of the human woman and the cubs had traveled across the galaxy. News stations from a dozen worlds ran the same footage. A small human in soft clothes, sitting on a cold floor, surrounded by sleeping cubs that were supposed to be monsters. The Galactic Union sent a message to Station 4. 3 representatives would arrive within 10 days. They wanted to observe the phenomenon for themselves. Commander was not happy about this. He stood in his office studying the message on his screen. "The Union has no authority here," he growled. "This is space, business." "With respect, Commander," said carefully, "the galaxy is watching. Refusing them could create political problems." Made a sound of frustration. His 4 hands clenched and unclenched. "Fine, they may observe, but they will not interfere." Knew nothing of these politics. She spent her days in the cub chamber, which was now called the nursery by everyone on the station. She had made changes to the space. Soft blankets covered the cold floors. Warm lights replaced the harsh red emergency glow. She had asked to raise the temperature so the cubs did not shiver at night. But the biggest change was the cubs themselves. They no longer attacked handlers. They no longer screamed or scratched at walls. They played with each other, rolling around the nursery in small piles of scales and limbs. They napped in the afternoon, curled together in a warm heap at the center. They ate their food calmly, waiting their turn instead of fighting. And they had names now. Had named each one. The largest cub was, which meant strength in an old Earth language. The smallest was, meaning spring or new beginning. There was the only female. There was who loved to sit in the warm spots under the lights. There was who was curious about everything, and there was the one who had first approached on that cold night. Cubs did not receive names until they survived to maturity, thought this was cruel. Every child deserved a name. Every child deserved to be called something other than a number. When the Galactic Union representatives arrived, was in the nursery reading a story. She had translated an old Earth children's book into simple words, and the cubs sat in a circle around her, listening with wide eyes. Brought the representatives to the observation window. They stood behind thick glass, watching the scene inside. The first representative was She was tall and thin, with a body made of hard shell segments and eyes that reflected light like mirrors. She watched with an expression that was impossible to read. The second was He had smooth blue skin and gills on his neck. His people lived in water but could survive on land for short periods. He pressed close to the glass, fascinated. The third was one of the elder species of the galaxy. She was covered in old scales that had turned gray with age. Her eyes were wise and tired. She had seen many things in her long life, but she had never seen this. The children are peaceful, they said. Her voice was dry like sand. Our reports said they were killers. Stood beside them, still wearing her armor out of habit. They were, before she came. And what did she do to them? They asked. What technology does she use? What drugs? Nothing. His voice was soft with wonder. She talks to them, she holds them, she makes them feel safe, that is all. The shook his head. This cannot be natural. The young are born in aggression as well. They fight from the moment they hatch. No amount of talking changes this. Human young are different, said. He had joined the group at the window. They are born completely helpless. They cannot survive without constant care. So humans evolve to give that care automatically. It is not learned. It is built into our bodies and brains. Inside the nursery climbed into Slap. He was still the smallest of the group, but he had changed the most. 3 weeks ago, the station doctors had said he would die. He was not eating. He was not growing. He had given up. Now he was the most active cub in the group. He followed everywhere. He fell asleep holding her hand. When she spoke, he watched her face like she was the most important thing in the universe. They pressed her old hand against the glass. This small one, tell me about him. Pulled up the records on her tablet. Cub number 6, born undersized, failed to thrive. He was scheduled for removal. And now, he is the healthiest cub we have. His growth rate has tripled. His aggression scores have dropped to 0. Paused. She named him. It means spring in an Earth language. There was quiet for a long moment. Then she spoke. I have lived for 200 cycles. I have seen empires rise and fall. I have watched species evolve and die. But I have never seen a creature change another creature through simple kindness. They made a sharp clicking sound. We need to study this. The implications are enormous. Every species in the galaxy struggles with violent young, if humans can calm them. If humans can be used as tools, interrupted, his voice harder than before. They turned to him. You misunderstand. This is a gift. Humans could serve on every world. You could save millions of young lives. Serve? Eyes were cold behind his glasses. You mean work. You mean be placed in dangerous situations with alien children who might kill them, for the good of the galaxy. Is that not a worthy cause? Inside the nursery looked up. She had noticed the group at the window. She said something to the cubs, then stood and walked to the door. When she stepped out, the representatives turned to face her. They spoke first. You are the human, the one who does the impossible. Smiled politely. I just do what feels right. What you do has great value, they said. The Union would like to discuss your future. There are many worlds that could use your skills. My future. They stepped forward slowly. Her old eyes studied his face. They want to take you, to use you, to spread you across the galaxy like a medicine. Smile faded. She looked at the representatives, then at who stood in the corner with crossed arms. "I am not a tool," she said quietly. "And these cubs are not experiments. They are children. They need homes and families, not handlers and programs." The shell clicked with irritation. "You do not understand the scale of what we are discussing. Billions of young across thousands of worlds." "I understand perfectly." His voice was still soft, but there was steel underneath it. "You see a solution to a problem. I see children who need love. These are not the same things." She turned and walked back into the nursery. The cubs rushed to greet her, their small hands reaching for her warmth. Pressed against her leg, and she picked him up, holding him close. Through the window, the representatives watched. The was frustrated. The was thoughtful. The simply nodded slowly, as if had passed a test she did not know she was taking. On the millions watched the broadcast of this meeting. They saw their cubs, peaceful and happy. They saw a human woman speak truth to power. And for the first time in their long history, they began to question everything they thought they knew about raising their young. 40 days had passed. Stood at the window of her quarters, watching the human ship approach the station. It was a small transport vessel, the same kind she had been traveling on when her life changed forever. The same kind that would take her back to Earth. Back to her empty apartment. Back to job listings and lonely nights. Back to a world where she had no one waiting for her. A soft knock came at her door. She opened it to find standing outside. The scientist was not wearing armor. She had stopped wearing it weeks ago. "The ship has docked," said. "They are ready for you." Nodded, she picked up her small bag of belongings. Everything she owned fit in one hand. She had arrived with nothing, and she was leaving with nothing. Except the weight in her heart. They walked together through the station. The hallways looked different now. Brighter. Some had started adding small decorations to their quarters. Others had requested softer lighting in the common areas. Small changes, but noticed them all. The path to the docking bay passed by the nursery, stopped outside the door. "I should say goodbye," she whispered. Touched her arm gently. "They do not understand goodbye. They are too young." "I know, but I need to say it anyway." Entered the nursery. The cubs were playing in the corner, rolling over each other in a happy pile. When they heard the door open, 6 heads turned toward her. 6 pairs of eyes lit up with joy. They rushed to her as they always did, reached her first, pressing his large head against her hip, wrapped her arms around his leg, and danced around her feet, sat back and watched with calm eyes. And little, who should have died, he stood in front of her and raised his arms, asking to be picked up. Lifted him and held him close. He was heavy now, healthy and strong. His scales had darkened to a beautiful deep blue. His eyes were bright and full of life. "I have to go," she said softly. "There is a ship waiting for me." Did not understand the words, but he understood her voice. He felt the sadness in it. His small arms tightened around her neck. His eyes filled with tears. She kissed the top of his head, feeling his smooth scales against her lips. "You are so strong now, so brave. I am so proud of you." Her voice broke. "All of you, I am so proud." She sat down gently. He grabbed her hand and would not let go. The other cubs gathered around her legs, pressing close, sensing that something was wrong. The door opened behind her. Commander stood in the entrance. "The ship is waiting," he said. Then he saw her face. He saw the cubs holding onto her. He was quiet for a moment. "Park." She turned to look at him, tears running down her cheeks. They do not offer permanent positions to outsiders. In 2,000 years, we have never welcomed another species into our service. He paused. "But you are not a normal outsider." His heart stopped. She was afraid to hope. Continued. "The High Council has reviewed your work here. They have seen what you have done with Batch 41. They have received thousands of messages from our people, asking questions about our methods of raising young." He took a deep breath. "They would like to offer you a position, official cub development advisor, the first in our history." Could not speak. She could only stare at the massive commander. You would live here on this station. You would continue your work with the cubs. We would study your methods and try to understand them. Perhaps we could teach others to do what you do. His yellow eyes softened. Perhaps we could finally learn to love our children. Appeared in the doorway behind. He was smiling widely. What do you think? Earth will always be there, but something like this. He shook his head. Some people search their whole lives for a purpose. You found yours in your sleepwear. Looked down at the cubs. Was still holding her hand, looking up at her with trusting eyes. He did not know what the adults were saying. He only knew that his favorite person was sad, and he wanted to make her happy. She knelt down so she was at his level. She looked at each of the cubs in turn. Her children, not by blood but by something deeper. Okay, she said quietly, then louder. Okay, yes, I will stay. The cubs did not understand the words, but they understood her smile. They piled onto her, knocking her backward onto the soft blankets. She laughed as they licked her face and made happy sounds. Wiped tears from her own eyes. Nodded slowly, something like satisfaction on his hard face. 1 year later. The nursery had moved to a larger space. It was warm and bright, with soft floors and colorful decorations. Plants from Earth grew in the corners. Music played softly through hidden speakers. Sat in the center of the room, surrounded by young. Batch 41 was no longer cubs. They had grown into healthy juveniles, tall and strong, but they still visited her every day. They still sat beside her when she read stories. They still fell asleep leaning against her warmth. Was the largest of the group now. The cub who should have died was taller than any of his siblings. His scales had turned a deep midnight blue, beautiful and healthy. He was proud and confident, a natural leader among the young. But he still held his hand when he was tired. He still rested his head on her shoulder when he needed comfort. Some things did not change with size. The door opened and entered with a group of small figures behind her. New cubs, batch 47. They were tiny and scared, huddled together against the strange new place. Had been training for 6 months. She no longer wore armor in the nursery. She had learned to speak softly, to move slowly, to offer warmth instead of control. She was not as natural as, but she was learning. They arrived this morning, said. They are very frightened. Stood and walked toward the new cubs. They pressed back against legs, watching the human with wide, nervous eyes. Knelt down slowly. She made herself small. She smiled. Hello, little ones, she said in her soft voice. Welcome to your new home. One cub, smaller than the others, took a tiny step forward. It sniffed the air. It smelled something strange, something warm and safe, something it had never encountered before. Trust, the human smelled like trust. The small cub took another step, then another. It reached out a tiny hand and touched his finger. Did not move. She only smiled and waited. The cub climbed into her lap. Behind them, batch 41 watched with calm eyes. They remembered being small and scared. They remembered the cold cages and the loneliness. And they remembered the night a human woman in sleepwear had opened a door and changed their lives forever. Walked forward and sat beside. He looked at the new cub in her lap, then at its face. He spoke a word in the language, a word that had no direct translation into human speech. It meant something between guardian and heart home. It meant the person who taught you that the universe was not cold. It meant the first person who ever loved you. Reached out and touched his face. I know, she said. I love you too. Outside the nursery, through the window, Commander watched in silence. Beside him stood 2 young officers who had requested transfer to the station. They wanted to learn. They wanted to understand. Thought about the thousands of messages he received every day, from across their empire asking questions. How do we speak softly? How do we show warmth? How do we learn to love our children? He did not have all the answers, but he knew where to find them. In a warm room, on a soft floor, where a small human woman had taught an entire species that the strongest armor was no armor at all. Just warmth, just presence, just love.